welcome to the inaugural Indian Comics Festival. We are making an effort to connect all the fans with all the creators and the rock stars. And I've seen people looking at him like, the Beyonce has showed up. All right. I'm looking forward to what Anand is going to tell us.
So let's get this event started. To my right is a guy, please don't take him lightly, he's made legends run for their money. This is a guy that Marvel, DC, Image, IDW, boom, every big comic publishing house in the world is after. Right? He's won an Eisner Award, which is like the Oscars of the comic book industry. Please give it up for Anand Radhakrishnan, guys. Over to you, Anand. There you go, buddy.
Thanks, guys. It's really weird to see. I was just telling these guys that I work from a small little apartment in Mumbai, so it's really nice to see human people who actually read my stuff and see my stuff. And when I draw it, I don't really think about it.
That's the only kind of apartment there is.
So anyway, let's get started. So fun little bit about this presentation. Yesterday I was sitting in putting all these images together, and my wife was helping me with it, and we were wondering what to name it, right? And my wife Nisha, this is just a showcase of my work. So we kept wondering what to name it, and for an hour we thought about what to name it. And she looked at me for a second and said, "Arey ChatGPT use kar le." And I was like, "What? Are you serious?" And we looked at each other for a minute, and I was like, "हाँ ठीक है, use कर लेते हैं." And I put my name in it, and it said Anand Radhakrishnan work presentation options, and it showed me like 10 options of really vague things. And I picked one of those really vague and horrible names, creating comics. And I thought, fine, let's just go with this. But the point is that all of this is extremely personal, this is all uncharted territory, and there is nothing generic about it. Every comic book creator goes through their own kind of path, and there's no, the path is so unbeaten that literally every creator has to make their own way. And none of what I say is probably going to apply to you if you're a comic book creator, and you'll probably have your own way of doing things in the future, or you're already probably doing it. Anyway, let's go for it. I went to JJ. I studied at JJ. I did my applied art from 2008 to 2011. And Hamza has already talked about the clients that I've worked for, DC, Image, etc., etc. I won't go into that. But as a showcase, this is some of my stuff. I work mostly, when it comes to comics, I've worked with creator on comics, and I've done covers. These are the two big avenues that I've worked in. So I've already mentioned I went to JJ. 2008-9 I started. I've always been into storytelling in some form or the other. Even though I didn't know that I wanted to draw comics, but I did want to put sequential work together and tell a story. So that was my driving force from the beginning, from the first year of college. I knew that I wanted to tell stories in some way or the other. And this was some of my earliest sequential work. On the left, you can see my third year project. It's for a water voice, very generic, but it was a cute little story about this kid who wanted to fly but couldn't. 6-page short story. My wife wrote the text for it, and we put it out, and that was my first kind of art, it was a sequential thing. On the right, you see a project that I put a little bit more thought and put more effort into it. It's called Chavi, and it was about 21 illustrations put together. Still, I haven't gotten into comics. This is just sequential stuff, just illustrations put together. And I had this idea of this key maker or locksmith that enters this new city and gets involved in this resistance movement. That was this idea that I had. And I basically wanted to draw guns, I wanted to draw leather, and I wanted to draw people with action getting killed and all of that shit. So I do this, and it was nice. But the thing is, the frustrating thing with drawing comics or any kind of visual medium is that you have an image in your head, and you look at all these artists, you look at all these websites. I was into CG Unit and CA.org at the time, like a lot. And you look at all these artists, and my दिमाग में एक idea होता है how this project needs to be. But the frustrating thing is that it's almost never the thing that you imagine it to be. And how much ever time you keep trying, it just never translates to what is in your head, and that's just extremely frustrating. So that happened to me with Chavi, and it's my longest running project yet. And this itself is this three four images itself is like me attempting two or three times to get it right. And obviously I didn't. Right now I can look at it and it has so many fucking flaws. And I've pulled it back again. Like I had some break recently, and I go into it again later in the presentation. But I went back to it, and I realized that I could now, after like 10, 12 years of working, I feel like now I can do a little bit of justice to the idea, but maybe not. We'll see in the future if it comes through, you know. Okay, so after JJ, I graduated in JJ in 2011, and then I did 2 years of TAG, the art department, which is an offshoot of the Illustration Academy in the US, and this is an online course that I did. And back in 2011-12, online courses are not super popular. It's very popular now with NMA, Schoolism, all of those schools. But back then they were not that popular, and I really wanted to go to SVA, but there was paise nahi the, I was super broke. So someone suggested the art department, and it was very cheap. So I was like, chalo, let's give it a shot. And they gave me a scholarship and all that jazz. And one assignment that we had in sketchbook class by Sterling Hundley, is an artist I really look up to. The assignment was, how do you find the personal voice? And that's something that every illustrator, every comic book artist, every artist kind of struggles with. How do you find the personal voice? How do you find a style? So one thing he suggested was, and I thought it's nice to share, is he said, there's an assignment called Vanity Sketchbook, okay? So he said, take any printed book. Printed because a blank book is very intimidating to anyone, right? Blank page is very intimidating. How do you ruin a blank page? He said, take any printed book, stick images of 2 artists that you find inspiring, 2 artists that really drives you and you're insane about, and stick those images on the front and back of that book. And in the middle of that book, you draw your own shit. And then you kind of combine those 2 touchstones that you have and kind of add your own flavor to it. And then eventually, years and years later, maybe if you keep that in mind, you will find something of your own that is original, that has your own flavor, that is you, like signature you know. So of course, I mean, I was young and I was very enthusiastic, so I was really into Akira. I just watched Akira, and I was really into those Satoshi Kon, Otomo, and all those big mangakas. So Otomo was one side of my vanity sketchbook. The other side was a very drastically different artist called Dean Conwell, like one of those golden illustrations, American illustrators called Dean Conwell, right? And in the middle, I put Bernie Fuse, who's another American illustrator, and he's also from the golden, but much later, like Mark English, Bernie Fuse, you have Bob Peak, and all these artists. And I noticed that as I kept drawing in that sketchbook for that assignment, I started to kind of find my own style. So if you look at these guys, you kind of see where I come from as an artist. And of course, you can't copy directly from your influences. You have to kind of shove your own thing into it, shove your own work into it, your ideas, influences, your upbringing, your cultural influences, etc. into it. And then maybe if you're lucky, you'll find your own kind of voice. So, fast forward to 2014, I graduated from TAD, and 2015 I started experimenting. I wasn't employed as a comic book artist when I got out, so I had to keep taking up gigs to pay the rent, etc., etc. And I started working at this design studio that did a lot of pre-production work for Bihar Museum. Now the museum is up, but back then it was still in production. So I did a lot of pre-production work for it. The work was fucking boring, but it paid the bills. So I was like, okay, chalo, ye karte I can do my own stuff after 5 p.m. You know? And that was something that has kept on with me through my whole career. So that time, this little casual little page I did. It was for DCKS. We were doing this chain comics where one artist would do one page and another artist would pick it up and do the next page. So it was a sequential page that kept going, sequential story that kept going. So this was my page, very random, very weird. And someone saw it, and that happened to be Ramvi. Ramvi is a writer in the UK, and he was just getting into comics back then as well. He had just started compiling an anthology of short stories for Black Mumbai. That was his first book. And he asked me to do a cover. And I was like, हाँ मतलब कर देंगे, मतलब सीखा तो है, थोड़ा skills है, कर लेंगे, क्योंकि वो cover करना ही था. So this, on the right hand side was the cover for Black Mumbai that I did. and he paid me 35K for it. And back then, just out of college, I was like, "Bhai, itna paisa mera koi?" Or and he paid me on time, so I was like, "Oh shit!" So this is comics. People pay on time, and I was like, "Oh, bloody hell!" So I did the cover, and that kind of was the start of a very long-term relationship between us. Ram and I have collaborated on multiple projects now, and we have an understanding. We know each other, we trust each other, we respect each other's work, and we know that they'll be able to do justice to each other's work. And we have worked on considerable number of projects after that. The starting of this collaboration was this short story called Miracle Men. Science fiction. We were both really into science fiction at the time, and we did this 6-page short story called Miracle Men. And I wanted to experiment. I'm always about experimenting. So मैंने बोला कि ना, I will do it for you if you let me experiment. So I was like, हाँ तो कर. So I mean, there wasn't any money in it. He paid me about 5-7K for this, but each page. But I was like, ठीक है, चलो digital कर किया, acrylic डाला उसमें, ink डाला, सब कुछ करके I made something. And this was my first sequential work, like 4 or 5 pages together. I made this. We sold copies of it in 2016 Bombay Comic Con. Ram had come down to the UK, and it got eventually published with SOS magazine, and it did fairly well. Got me some eyeballs, etc., etc. Around the same time, I also did 5 pages for this massive collaborative effort called Bartkira, which is really predictable. Bartkira is like Tatsuhiro Otomo's Akira meets The Simpsons. So it's a very fun project started by James Harvey in the UK. What he did was he translated all of Otomo's work for Akira and drew it with Simpsons characters, which is a very fun little twist, and I was very immediately drawn to it. So I did 5 pages. Bidikar, who is the third leg of our partnership, did the letters for this. And the learning curve I had with this, because accidentally I was studying Otomo's work directly, right? And any art teacher will tell you, like, the best way to study someone is to do master copies, is to copy the fuck out of the person you look up to, your touchstones. So I studied Otomo's work in these 5 pages. It wasn't a lot, but I did the studying, and I started to understand how he composes figures, how he draws figures, how he simplifies shapes, how the eye moves from one panel to another. And obviously this is not the best work, this is way old, I don't own it, but at the same time it was fun. And recently, it got exhibited in Tokyo or something, somewhere in Japan. And the whole project is now together. You can check it out on bartkira.com. I'm going to take a little bit of a tangent and go back to Sketchbook. The idea of sketchbooking, like I mentioned before, that I had a class with Sterling Handley called Sketchbook, and I had 2 classes with him, and that really drove into my head how important maintaining a sketchbook is. And I prescribe to it. I've been working as a professional illustrator for many years now, from 2011 to now. So it's been more than 10 years, and I always have a sketchbook. Even right now in my bag there is a sketchbook. There's always a sketchbook with me, and I think of sketchbooks as having 2 branches. One is drawing from imagination, and one is drawing from observation. So this is something that I was exploring with while drawing from imagination, and the twisting of turning of shapes, the little details, this and that. I kept adding those things, and this series I did right after TAD, and like incidentally, this led to my first international gig. So Ben and Neil, the editor of Imaginative magazine, and Imaginative magazine was something that I used to really look forward to back in college. By then it had kind of lost its luster, but Ben and Neil got in touch, UK publisher, UK editor, he got in touch with me saying, "Arey yaar, I saw your stuff on Facebook," and I used to post on Facebook back then, everyone used to. So he saw some of my sketchbook threads, and he's like, "We are doing a sketchbook issue where we are kind of featuring different artists, and would you like to be part of it?" I was like, "Yeah, I would love to." And the great thing about these publishers is they pay you even for features, which is great, so more money coming in. So I was like, yeah. That happened, and that led to a series of tutorials with Imaginative magazine, and that took up my whole year. So 6 or 7 issues I did for tutorials I did for Imaginative, and this was very weird for me because I was doing tutorials just starting out, and I wouldn't touch tutorials now. So back then I don't know what kind of confidence I had to go and do tutorials, but I did it and it was decent money coming in pounds, so I was very happy. Anyway, then I started working after the Black Mamba cover. I started working more in comics and I did a bunch of covers. And covers are honestly my first love. I go to covers whenever I need a break and whenever I need to take a break from sequential art and I'm bored and I want to do a different kind of thing. So this is for the left is for Brigands issue 1, I think. Right side is Ruin of Thieves. That is also issue 1. But both are Ramgi projects, and at the time we were both coming up, so we used to always collaborate with each other on each other's projects. And whenever he was starting on a project, I used to do covers for him. And I got started, and you can see that both of these have different kind of influences, and you can see some of the sketchbook stuff coming into play here. Like I took some of the lessons that I learned while sketchbooking and applied them to professional work, and that's how I usually work. I make my mistakes in my sketchbook. I experiment like hell, and then I kind of take some of those lessons like, hey, this shape goes well with this shape, and this line art goes well with this tone, and then I kind of put them together when I'm doing professional work. So these came about 2016, around to the end of 2016 or so. And back when Ram and I met, 16-17, we had also discussed the possibility of drawing, starting on a long form comic book, which was something I had not done before. So it was extremely intimidating for me. And because I am a kind of a chameleon when it comes to comics, when it comes to art, I have a lot of trouble sticking to one art style. And that's also, it's an advantage and also a disadvantage, because when you look at illustrator, any art school teacher will tell you that it's important to have one art style that is uniform on your art, just simply because you'll be more recognized. But for some reason I just couldn't do it, and so far it has not been an issue in my career. So I'm going to keep experimenting. I'm going to do whatever the hell I want. But I'm guessing that maybe that has been detrimental to my career. Who knows? So we discussed the possibility of doing a comic book based in Bombay, and I'm a Bombay person, so I was like, I would definitely love to work on a Bombay-based comic book. And at the time, Dali rap was coming up, and Nazi and Divine were big at the time. So we were like, like Bombay subcultures, Bombay like graffiti, rap, etc., why not? So we started working on it, and I explored the style a little bit. This is a little bit casual, this is a little bit lighthearted. But Graffiti's wall started developing at that time. It was published in 2018 by Unbound Comics. Eventually got bought out by Dark Horse, and now it's available with Dark Horse Comics on Amazon and on their website, etc., etc. But the cool thing that I tried with Graffiti's wall is that so Ram and me, usually when we work together long form comic book projects, one thing that has always remained common with our work is that we like to play with music. And in this case, it was supposed to be hip hop. And so you'll notice that a lot of the comic pages have kind of have beats to them, have sound beats to them. So it feels like reading music. So if you notice panel 3 of the left hand side, the first page, there's a rattle, and this panel 5 will have a hiss. And that keeps repeating, like panel 3 has a rattle on the next page and a hiss on the 5. So when you read this in sequence, it kind of rattle, hiss. The beat keeps happening in your head. And that's something that I found very interesting. Like I hadn't done that kind of thing before. And again, the rattle hiss here. And this is the introduction of the character. Graffiti's Wall was a slice of life story of 4 teenagers coming together during the span of a summer. And by the end of the summer, they go their own way, nothing happens, nothing dramatic happens, so and so, people move on. So that's the kind of story, and it wasn't dramatic, no superheroes, nothing. And it was cool, I like those kind of stories. And the lessons I learned, and this I really like to share because even I was aware of these things even when I was drawing Graffiti's Wall, was that I wasn't consistent when I was drawing faces or characters or pages. Because like I mentioned, I think of myself as a chameleon. I'm good at adapting styles, but when you ask me to stay consistent for like 200 pages, I kind of lose track of things. I get bored of the same style and I kind of want to change it up. So if you look at Graffiti's Wall even now, and this has been 6 years since I drew this, the first page and the last page are slightly different. Like if you're an artist, you will see it. Like if you're someone who's not used to reading comics, you may not see it, but most people will be able to tell कि कुछ तो मतलब है. And that is the critique that I got a lot from this book. And I'm the kind of person who goes to websites and reads reviews, and there are so many like shit reviews about this book saying कि अरे ये character अलग दिख रहा है दूसरे panel में. And I took it to heart, and I was like, okay, so that's an issue. If I'm drawing 200 pages in one go, all my characters need to look consistent. They need to look identifiable, and I can't make this mistake again. So that was a big lesson for me. Then I returned to sketchbooking again, and I mentioned before how sketchbooking is very important to me personally. And usually what happens is, when I work on a long project like Graffiti's Wall or Blue and Green, usually you spend time doing it. So a year and a half, 2 years even. And when you're done with it, you are a different artist. And your tastes have changed by then. Your inspirations have kind of changed by then, and it's noticeably different. And it's important to kind of step back and look at some of your work and see क्या change हुआ है and what you can use as a benefit. So I come back to sketchbooking for that reason, and this is some of the stuff I made. You can see some Graffiti's Wall in this, and you can see that I've changed the form a little bit, kind of polished the forms a little bit, pushed and pulled a little bit. More sketchbook stuff from that time. By this time it was already 2018, and Ram and I discussed the possibility of working on our next big project, which is the way he pitched to me was this saxophonist who was pursuing excellence, pursuing mastery, and he meets talent, like the literal personification of talent or mastery or excellence, and that was very appealing to me. I said, like, yeah, let's do it. And I spent a month and a half just simply exploring styles, because I knew that this was a very different book tonally from Graffiti's Wall. It couldn't be the same, but you will see what I mean when it comes to music. This is obviously also set in music, but this is a whole different kind of school, isn't it? This is jazz, and this is blues, and this is set in the US and not in Mumbai. So I've never even been to the US, so I needed context, and we spent a lot of time discussing it. So I worked on, and I had some money was left over from Graffiti's Wall, so I was able to spend some time exploring what kind of style it could be. And this was a mixed media approach. Graffiti's Wall was just ink and digital color, but Blue and Green was more graphite, watercolor, ink, acrylic, digital color on top of that, and slapping things on each other and just seeing what works. And I like that kind of approach. And another cool thing about Blue and Green was the way we approached working on this. Firstly, I would like to go and discuss creator-owned projects with you guys. The first book was published by Unbound, so it was creator-owned, but at the same time I did get a page rate for it. But Blue and Green was different. Blue and Green was Image. Image is the third biggest publisher in the world. But the thing that identifies Image as a different kind of publisher is that Image doesn't own the rights of the IP. Image publishes creator-owned work, which means the creators of the IP will own the rights, and the company doesn't own it. As opposed to DC and Marvel, where a Spider-Man, कोई भी artist ले लो, but a Spider-Man will remain with DC or with Marvel only. And so is with Batman is not going to go away from DC. They're not going to give away the rights to it at any point. But that's where creator-owned comics come in. Image was made in 1992 by some of the artists that got out of Marvel, and that's a ray of hope for all these artists and creators who want to make IP and want to keep creating content, because they retain the rights, and that's hugely important. For example, The Walking Dead is a DC property, is a Image property. And Robert Kirkman and Charlie Adler made The Walking Dead, which eventually went on to become a massive AMC project. And they made bank with that project, right? And if they didn't own the rights, they wouldn't make anything. Like the creators of Batman didn't make that much money from whatever movies and films and shows that Batman was in. So I wanted to take a little bit of time to discuss creator-owned projects, and it's important for us as a community of new artists and new creators coming up in this country. It's important to know these distinctions and not give up rights to big conglomerates and keep the rights with yourself. That's hugely important. What else? Oh yeah. So one thing I learned with blue and green. Oh yeah. So again, this was a creator-run project, and one thing that we did that was very different from drawing comics is usually comics is a pipeline project, right? There are thumbnails, there are pencils, then the pencils go to the inker, then the inker का काम goes to the colorist editor देखता है पूरा वो letterer देखता है फिर editor करेगा. It's a pipeline. It's a very streamlined process, and DC Marvel work like that. All the big publishers work like that. But since the means of production was with us, the power was with us creators in this project, we tried a different project. We were like, chalo, since this book is about jazz, let's fuck around a little bit, let's mess around a little bit, let's not do the pipeline bit. So we used to have this system where Ram would call me in the morning and he'd be like, हाँ, कल का page ये था. Next, what happened to the story? And it's like, then he would tell me what happened to the story, I would thumbnail, I'd send it back, I'd do the page, and then you look at the page and go like, oh, okay, so this is cool, so next page this happens. And then we would discuss it, and I was like, नहीं ये page बहुत ज़्यादा flow नहीं हो रहा है, let's do a different approach. And there's a two approach, so it's basically like jazz, right? Two people playing jazz instruments, and that was a very cool like experience. I've never had that before, and I didn't have that again later. And I don't think comics work like that, but it was cool because it's two people like playing to each other's strengths, and it was basically like two people playing jazz music. Another thing that I really want to touch upon was original art. Like if you're an artist, and if you're working for a big company like DC, Marvel, etc., whichever big company you want to work for, always keep ownership of the original art that you work on. So what happens and what I've noticed is, once you scan in an artwork, it becomes two entities. The digital entity that you send to the editor, it remains with the person who owns the IP, right? So if I'm drawing something for DC, for example, I've done a page. I work traditionally always for this reason. I've drawn a page, I've scanned it and sent it. So immediately two entities come into place. One entity is a digital piece that has gone to the editor, now it's going to be printed. That IP is owned by DC, and I don't own that. But the physical piece of art, that is always owned by the artist. That I will always own, and I decide what happens with that piece of physical piece of art. And that, don't let anyone take that away from you, because there's massive money in that shit. Like I've noticed that through my years of working in comics, I've realized that in the US especially and Europe, there's a massive community of collectors, original art collectors. It gets auctioned, it sells for a lot of money. And मेरा घर कोविड के टाइम पे इसी वजह से चला, मतलब blue and green original art it was out, and 2020-2021 I was able to sustain myself only from blue and green. And blue and green, when we put out the original art in 2020, 70-75% of the original art sold off the first day, and I was surprised. I was like, अरे मैं तो मतलब फालतू पेपर पे काम कर रहा हूँ, कार्टेज पेपर पे काम कर रहा हूँ. Like I didn't know these things are going to sell, but that's what made my like I was able to sustain myself and my family from just original art money. So when you're drawing traditionally for comics, make sure to keep ownership of your original art. More blue and green. Now you can see what I meant when I looked at some Bernie Fuchs and some Golden Era American illustrators. Bernie Fuchs, Bob Peak, Mark English, all of those artists I studied from, I studied, copied. And those of, I've kind of twisted and turned and made it my own, but I kind of put it in this is an American comic book. Then I returned to, again, as nature dictates it, I've worked on blue and green for a year and a half now, and I returned to my sketchbook stuff. I always do that, to take a breather, to step back and look at my stuff. I worked on a bunch of sketchbook stuff after that. And a year passes, and then Ram and I are like, okay, so we've done 2 books together, both music. Let's do a 3rd book to make it kind of a triad of series, right? And we returned to this idea that we had in 2015 or so called Radio Apocalypse. And the idea was that what if there's only one radio station operational in like Apocalypse? The world is down to shit, but there's only one radio station still alive. What happens then? That's the basic premise of the story. And we were like, okay, this is interesting. Let's get back to it. And we approached Walt Comics, and we were like, okay, we'll hold most of the IP, but we want to get back and do this story. We did 2 issues of Radio Apocalypse. The style, you will see that I've returned to line after blue and green, and this is reminiscent a little bit of blue and green, but slightly different as well. This is a little bit more mature. This is more adult audiences, etc., etc. A little bit more gritty because apocalypse, people dying, and creatures and all that. Finished Radio Apocalypse 2 issues. Then we kind of fell off. We finished 2 issues, and then we had some issues with publishers. The time concerns, etc., etc., and the series kind of fell off, and we couldn't take it forward. Anyway, we had 4 issues in mind. It was a short series, but we didn't finish it. And I mean, that's also one thing to keep in mind, right? Like, however passionate you are about projects and however intense your interest is in a project. Comics is a collaborative project. There are lots of moving parts in it, and then one moving part falls off and everything kind of stops and then doesn't go. So these things also happen. Failures do happen. I mean, I had fun with it, but it is what it is. It didn't go forward. More RA. Then again, since I had some time, the project had gone through and had fallen off. I took another break, and in that break I was doing comics and comic book covers. And I went back to some of my collaborators. I wrote to them. I was like, no, I'm taking up book covers now. So I did. The left one here is for Michael Walsh. Silver Coin is Ivy. The right is my debut with DC Comics. So this was DC Black Label, an offshoot of DC, the main DC that we heard of. This one is James Tynnion's The Nice House on the Lake, issue 2. So this is a painted cover, and I had a lot of fun with it, and that was kind of my break into DC Comics. And once you know the editors at DC, I mean, I haven't worked with Marvel, but I'm guessing it works the same way. Once you know the editors, they will come back to you and they'll be like, "Arey, deadline karega kya kaam?" So that's how all creative projects work, right? So Batman Urban Legends kind of happened that way. We worked on 3 issues, 10 pages each, and I in terms of style, I experimented a little bit. I wanted to bring in some of what I had with blue and green, but I wanted to add a layer of line to that. So you'll notice that my whole career has been like this juggling match between line and tone. And in this project, I can try to experiment in a different way. So you'll see that it looks like layers, like looks like tone and then line on top of that. And there's the main character is White Witch, who is not very well known, but she's Desi, which is an interesting thing. I was like, okay, DC is doing work with DC characters, that's good. Let's push that. So okay, 30 pages in total. Good money. DC always pays well on time. So this was one of my recent comic book thingies. This is 10-pager for James Tyrion's Substack, and I worked with Bedika, who's usually a letterer, but he wrote in this. It was about Monkey Man, etc., etc. It's not important. Then another return to comic book covers, and I know someone mentioned Lela Star and Monkey Prince here. And this Lela Star was for Boom Comics, the Round project. And on the right is another DC project with Jessica Chen. So I mentioned that editors get in touch with you and ask you to work. And so that's what happens when you start working with DC or Marvel, and they have you in their directory. It's just easier because they're looking for artists. And if you're at hand, they'll send you an email, and if you're professional, if you put your work on time, if you're able to submit your work on time, they will get back to you for sure. And this was Monkey Prince thing, very short deadline, I think a week I had. I think less than that. But it's a cool thing because Monkey Prince is supposed to be fighting all these Justice League characters, and I thought it'd be cool if he's eating like a McDonald's Happy Meal and then has DC characters as toys. So fun little idea, and Jessica was open with it, so I was like, yeah. More DC covers. On the left is Swamp Thing, and on the right hand side, you can see on the right hand side is Aquaman Andromeda, another Black Label project. And this was a little bit of a change in tone when it comes to my work. I decided that I mentioned before that I'm a chameleon when it comes to art, but I decided that thoda sa I need to streamline. I need to seem a little bit cohesive as an artist. And as I mentioned before, I always struggled between line art and tone. And for these series of covers, I decided, okay, you know what? Now I have a body of work of different styles. Why not I stick to one style that combines line art and shape design and tone and the painterly style and different values, and stick to a limited color palette and have like this style that puts all of these influences of mine together. And this came about. On the left is Damn Them All by Cy Spurrier and Charlie Adler. On the right is The Department of Truth, very successful series, I'm sure Hamza keeps talk. Of another James Tynion book, James Tynion and Martin Simmons. I kept working on this series of images. On the left is Rare Flavors, on the right is a fantasy series called Coda by another C. Spurrier book and Matthias Bergara. I kept going, I mean, I don't have much to add about this. And we have another presentation thingy. Stuck again. Okay, it's back. Okay, so I'll take you through a little bit of, it's blurred, but take you through a little bit of the process of drawing a cover. I don't know if all of you guys are artists, but it helps to know a little bit of the process. Usually when I'm asked to do a cover, right, the first thing I would do is I'd go back and study the property itself. So this was Department of Truth, which has a lot of issues. This is issue 21. So I didn't read all of it, but I read the latest issue and I read the first issue. And the first thing that you would want to do is go back and study the property itself. So you would read everything that's been done till now. And that's what I did. I read the latest issue. I understood in gist, like it's impossible to understand the whole story. But I understood in gist what's happening in the story, what's the character like, etc. etc. And then you send thumbnails. I mentioned before the thumbnails are the backbone of the comic book industry. So I sent thumbnail ideas to the editor. The editor Steve Fox in this. So I sent him a few ideas. Normally I sent him more, but I normally send the editors more roughs. But this time I had a fair idea of what I want. So one of the characters dies in the Aeronautical and Space Museum in Washington or something. So I thought, what if, and one of the character gets manipulated by another character. I won't go into details, but so I thought, what if I had like this person playing a marionette with these airplanes and seeing these airplanes in miniature kind of feels evocative. So I thought, let's try that. And I sent him ideas. And those X's, if you've read Department of Truth, you know that the X's play a really major role in the story. So I kind of multiplied the effect of the X. And I messed around with the idea of these planes flying around and the guy playing marionette to this other guy who is staring blankly at the screen. And then there's a pencil stage where I draw very tight pencils, and then a rough color stage, and then the final. So basically it's a long process and with multiple steps involved that not many people get to see. And that's the end of a short review of my professional work. And then I thought, since I've shown you some of my professional work, I'll take you through some of my personal stuff too. This is some of my sketchbook stuff that I do for myself, where I don't expect to be paid for it. There's no editor, there's no client. I just do this shit myself whenever I feel like. And another thing, okay, I don't need images for this. One thing that isn't exactly about comics, but has been extremely essential to my practice as an artist is maintaining a sketchbook, and I've said this before. But I only spoke about the first part of the sketchbook, the drawing from imagination, which has direct applications to comics, right? But the second part of that sketchbooking practice is drawing from life, drawing from observation, and that's something that, even though it doesn't directly affect comics, has been a major role in my own career. So I thought I should talk about that. And what I mean by drawing from life is not essentially drawing from a model, but just going out with a sketchbook and drawing people. And that's important to understand, because that distinction is important to understand, because when you're drawing a model from life, that model is very aware of being drawn, right? So when a person is aware of being drawn, you can't explain it, but the body kind of stiffens up. And the only way to kind of go around that is if you draw from life. Be a bit of a ninja when it comes to make people awkward a little bit. I mean, I've done my share. And there are ethical concerns about this and consent and stuff, but let's not get into that. But the idea is to draw people when they're not aware of it, so that you understand how the body rests. And that's very important. You don't see those in images. How the human body rests is only, the human body truly rests only when it knows that it's not being observed and looked at. And that's been a huge lesson for me. And yeah, that essentially ends my presentation. Thank you for listening. And if you guys can, thank you. I hope I didn't bore you guys. But if you guys have any questions, I'm here to answer them.
I
just want to know the thing that you were talking about, the rhythm in the artwork. So when we're talking to the artist, I'm not an artist. So when we're talking to the artist and we have that screenplay written in the same way, how do you actually explain it? Now, what does Ramvi tell you? This is the script, I've got the script, these are the panels and all, everything is sorted. But how do you set that tone?
Ram and I are essentially friends now, so he just calls me. So I think it's really important for you as a writer to have this very organic relationship with your artist. And I don't think there are any conventions when it comes to this. I would suggest sit down with the artist. Na, matlab, you can even send them thumbnails. So we did this also. Ram and I, when he was having trouble communicating with me, he would just draw little thumbnails. And thumbnails for the uninitiated is basically just small little roughs, very small 2 to 3 inch roughs. And those are like the backbone of the comic industry. Like everyone in comics, everyone does thumbnails. So thumbnailing is definitely something you can do yourself, right? As a writer. So if you're not able to communicate your idea through the script itself, I would suggest sitting down with the artist and then explaining to him visually, because if that's obviously easier than explaining verbally or telling them on phone. So I would just suggest to sit down, draw a little bit of a thumbnail, very rough, it doesn't matter, stick figure bhi chalega. But just draw a little thumbnail, explain ki ye yahan pe jayega, wo wahan pe jayega. That's the easiest way to explain anything to anyone.
Hello, this is Atharva. It's just a bit of off topic from the comic, but I'm really interested in the Kuntham character series. Can you just explain your concept and idea behind it? I would really like to know, I know the Kuntham toy and collectible that is, but what's your idea with playing with the character series? Because you said you are exploring with a bit of storytelling and you're also exploring a bit of environment, world building basically. So if you can explain on that.
So I'm glad you addressed that, because I was trying to find a segue into that, but since it has nothing to do with comics, I didn't bring it up. But the collector series essentially is taking the onus from the collectible itself to the person who collects it. And I imagine, so Kuntham is a very subjective project. So it doesn't have any canon of itself, it doesn't have any story of itself. So if you want to build a story on it, you're free to. So that's the whole idea. So why I started working on that project is that I was tired of working with writers and other people, working with editors. So I was like, okay, so I am drawing other people's stories. And that kind of frustrated me beyond a point. Now, it's been almost 15 years since I've been drawing comics. And it started to frustrate me a lot that I am essentially a pawn in other people's stories, right? I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. But in the end, I wanted to put my own art forward. So I thought, what if there's a project where you do the art first? And then the story doesn't matter. Story tum khud bana lo, jo bhi karna hai. So that was the basic backbone of the project. And the character series happened like that. So in my head, I'm like, isko canon nahi hai, isko subjectivity nahi hai. But at the same time, the person who collects these collectibles is not someone that you look up to. It's a little bit, it's a kind of a disgusting habit, like chewing and spitting pan, for example. It's not utterly disgusting, but at the same time, you don't look up to it. It's like, "Arey, matlab kya kar raha hai?" So it's also a little bit addictive. So I thought, what if you put that context and you mess around with it? So then I started exploring stories, see what kind of people would start collecting these stories. And that's how the collector series came about. I have a bunch of ideas in mind. I asked a bunch of different storytellers and artists to come together and be like, I'm going to give you this collectible toy and you design story whatever the heck you want. It doesn't matter. And people come up with some crazy shit. Like one person talked about their maternal issues and how they would pass on their maternal trauma onto this little collectible toy and pass it forward. So think about something as subjective as a collectible. You can tell whatever the story you want. And that's the whole idea behind the. So I have absolutely no brief when it comes to this. I do whatever the heck you want. तुमको brief तुम्हारे दिमाग में बना तो बना लो. Because that's the idea.
Thank you.
Just.
I have two questions. First thing is, do you take inspiration from Tomar Hanukkah and The Last Days of American Crime? The artist behind The Last Days of American Crime. It's Image Comics only.
Right.
Great question.
Okay.
Do you take influence? I'm seeing some of your art resemblance.
Yeah. Tomar Hanukkah is a massive influence for sure.
Second thing is, why not superhero comics? You don't like it? Because I'm not seeing the Spider-Man there. I'm not seeing my.
If someone
Alex Malev is doing.
Yeah, he does
in his own
digital
ways, right?
watercolor stuff. Yeah.
Yes.
If someone pays me, I'll do it. But I'm a
You are-
sellout. I'm a total sellout. I'll do it. If someone pays me good page rate, I can lega. My only issue is that
When you got that award, you are the top of the world. Nobody has done it in India. I don't know. People have.
right.
Then,
No, it's just we have seen NCU come up. We've seen DCU failing. People are kind of tired of superheroes, and everything is the same. And honestly, Marvel and DC can't experiment a lot with superheroes. They are stuck to their IPs. They can't really mess around that much. So if I want to do superheroes, I'd do it with something a little bit different, something that is still an image property. But I still own the IP. वो रहेगा ना थोड़ा मजा.
वो IP का ज़्यादा concern है?
थोड़ा concern तो है. But at the same time, I'm working. Ram and I have our next project together is going to be a superhero only.
Oh.
It's going to be Resurrection Man. Is one of those classic legacy characters of DC. So we are going to definitely approach superheroes, but I don't want to do the same massive muscles standing on hilltop, that kind of thing. It just doesn't interest me anymore.
Secondly, I think these are the golden days of Indian artists because lots of DC, Spider-Man, India, Spider-Man, Abhishek Malsuni.
Yeah.
It's good days. Thank you.
Hi, so my name is Srishti and I'm also an artist. So I've heard that, like everywhere that I see, that people say, artists basically say that you should have a style, right? A style of work. But with me is like I draw portraits. In 6 months I've also created digital art and illustrations and acrylics mostly. So I want you to know. I want to know from you that when you approach an editor or something, is it important to have a style? Because I don't have. I get bored easily, and then I switch to something else. As you said here, that you also switch to something else. So is it important to have a style?
Something that I have been concerned about myself when it comes to style, and trust me, every artist I know worries about this. And even people who you think have a style, like someone mentioned Toman, and Toman also has a style for sure. Usne bhi काफी mess up किया है. He went to SVA by the way, and if you look at some of his SVA assignments, you will see a bunch of different styles. He's experimented. He's done a bunch of experiments, and how you develop a style is the question. Like you go to art school first year में तुम style पकड़ के अगर कर लो, तो then it won't have the backbone to stand the test of time. If you spend 10 years developing a style, if you kept working, oh this works, this doesn't work, it's like the evolution of your style matters. So I would suggest that if you think you don't have a style now, what happens if you take away? How do you use references when you work? Sometimes. Okay. So I would suggest if you take away all the references from your work, don't use any reference, and just freestyle draw. Listen to some music, see how you draw freestyle, and you will notice that you do certain things. You draw a hand a certain way, you draw eyes a certain way, you draw the human figure a certain way, and that essentially is your style. Your skills, the skills that you've added to your being in so many years, that along with the way you draw naturally, that is your style. I mean, it's not rocket science in the end. But I see what you mean. And you can see in my work, I don't stick to one style. I do whatever the fuck I want. But problem is, when you write to editors, and that was the second part of your question, when you write to editors, it helps if you have a cohesive art style, and it helps for them to know कि इसने काम किया है इसमें. So I would suggest not look at style, but develop a project. And that's what matters. So if you want to write to editors, build a pitch. And वो 10 pages में तो style same ही होगा ना. That is not going to change. So make sure that your pitch remains cohesive. That's what matters more than you can do a bunch of different things in your free time also. And every artist does. There's no one in the world who sticks to just one style. It would be boring. Like why would you do that?
Okay. Thank you.
Just.
I'm a writer and I have a good sense of what good writing looks like if I'm meeting lots of different writers and lots of different pages. But I wanted to know from you, what do you think are the elements of good illustration, especially in comics? If you, for example, are taking lots of different artists making different comic pages, what are things you look out for, or what are things if you see you're like, no, this person's still a bit of a beginner?
In terms of when I read someone's writing?
Yeah, or what do you think the elements of good art for comic books would be?
Be good writing for comic books?
No, art.
Anyone who can draw anyone who has a sense of storytelling, I think definitely can tell a story in terms of comics. Of course, that's the basics of it. That's the absolute basics. But there are so many different moving parts involved, like I mentioned, right? You have to understand the human figure because we are people who who tell stories about people. So the human figure is definitely involved. There's some other things like perspective, composition. So I mean, I would suggest that you have like a grading system where you look at, is this person able to draw the human figure? Check. Is this person able to draw perspective correctly, convincingly enough? It doesn't have to be 100% correct, but convincingly enough. Is this person able to tell a story within 2-3 pages? So I would suggest that when you're asking for artists to send their work, don't ask them to send 1 page. Ask them to send 3-4 pages, maximum 10 pages. So what happens is you can tell कि एक page से दूसरे page जा रहा है story, and this person is able to translate a story into comic book panels and tell a story cohesively. And that I think is more important than anything else. Of course, like I mentioned before, the figure drawing, the color theory, etc., still matters. But being able to tell a story is quite a rare skill actually. Like you have to really, it takes time to get that skill to tell a story without taking too much effort and without giving too much information to the audience. And I think that comes with time and thumbnailing, and you can ask them to show them your sketches, their sketchbook drawings, their thumbnails. Thumbnailing especially is a very good tool for a writer, because what that does is you can do thumbnails, very rough thumbnails of, oh, this figure comes in from the left hand side, there's this figure from the right hand side comes in from the door, etc. You can do a little bit of a storyboard, so to speak, and you can send it to them, and that kind of tells you what kind of artist this is, or this person is equipped enough to draw a story.
Hi, my name is Indrani. I'm a video game developer, and the three of us actually make video games together. She is the artist. My question is about collaborating on like original IPs and building the identity and the art style of a particular like piece of product, right? Whether it's comics or games, and what that collaboration looks like, and what are some effective ways you've found like communicating between someone who's not the artist and the artist when developing like the identity of a product.
Yeah, that's a great question. Firstly, and all the best to you guys for your project. One thing I've noticed is that when there's a collaborative project like comics or video game or animation or anything, right? There has to be a hierarchy. Like you can't have a communist system where each person is equally involved in the project. You have to have a hierarchy where it's one person's vision for the project, and that's really important because otherwise too many cooks for issue with that. And that happens when in a lot of projects you see that multiple people are involved, and it ends up becoming hodgepodge of projects. So first thing I would suggest is that define your vision, and it helps if it's one person's vision for the project. So it remains one thing instead of becoming too many things, and that's invaluable when it comes to independent projects. For example, anime. Like you look at the biggest mangas, the biggest anime, Araki's JoJo's Bizarre Adventures, for example. It's weird as hell, but it remains cohesive. It's one thing simply because it is his vision and not too many people involved. Of course, there are animation studios, etc., that come into and many people handle it. But at the same time, it's one person that is heading the show, and their vision comes through in the end. And that I think is the biggest thing to keep in mind.
That makes sense. Thank you so much.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, Anand. Please give it up for Anand Radhakrishnan.